I arrived with both hands full, one carrying my pecan pie, the other a thermos of strong black coffee, still warm. The porch light was already off. No one came to the door. I let myself in. Laughter spilled from the dining room. Plates clinked. Something about a game the twins were playing. I stepped out of my shoes, careful not to track in melted snow. My coat stayed on a little longer than usual. Marissa looked up from her end of the table fork in midair. "Oh," she said, then smiled, tight, polite, like I was someone's neighbor who'd dropped by unannounced. There was no plate set, not a napkin, not a chair pulled out. The table was already full: glazed ham, mashed potatoes, deviled eggs. Rolls. My pie, still untouched, sat at the far end next to the sink, not even sliced. I held the thermos up gently. "I brought coffee," I said. Marissa let out a breathy laugh. "That's sweet, but we already have plenty." I turned to set the pie down beside the others. My hands trembled just enough for the foil to slip off. Actually, she added loud enough for the table to hear, "You didn't contribute anything this year, did you?" I looked at her, unsure where she was going with it. She blinked slow and pointed. "You don't even deserve leftovers." I stood there a moment too long. My son didn't say a word. He didn't look at me. The kids fell silent, eyes darting between their parents. No one moved. I nodded once, softly. "Of course." I found an empty corner of the kitchen island, sat down on the stool with the shaky leg, and poured myself a cup of coffee from the thermos I brought. I didn't touch the food. When I left, the pie was still whole. The air outside stung more than usual, or maybe it was just the way I was breathing. Shallow, measured. Like I was afraid the night would hear me thinking. I walked down the short path I once helped my husband lay back when the boys were still in school. We used to plant marigolds along the edge every spring, thick as a border. Now it was bare dirt and gravel. The wind moved through the empty flower beds like it didn't recognize them either. At the end of the driveway, I paused and turned around. The house was glowing light in every window, shadows moving across the curtains. Voices echoed from inside. For years it was the loudest place on earth, full of life and burnt toast and mismatched mugs. Now it looked like a stranger's house that just happened to know my name. My hand drifted to the keys in my coat pocket. The same set from years ago, though. I hadn't used them in months. I used to live there. My name was still on the deed. I paid the property taxes, the insurance, even the garbage collection. But I hadn't stepped foot in the master bedroom since I boxed up my husband's jackets and gave the closet to Marissa. It was supposed to be temporary. I told them they could have the house just until they got on their feet. It was right after the twins were born. Marissa had that emergency C-section and Thomas was between jobs. I'd already moved into the smaller place near the grocery store. It made sense back then. I never asked for rent. I just wanted the home to stay full of people who loved each other. But tonight, I had to knock before entering. Tonight I drank coffee alone in the kitchen, while my son let someone else speak for him. As I turned and started walking again, my knees stiff from the cold, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. They weren't the guests. I was. I set the pie on the counter when I got home. It was still whole, still warm. I didn't bother with the fridge. I pulled off my coat, turned off the porch light, and walked to the small filing cabinet in the hallway. Third drawer down, marked House. Personal. Inside was a manila folder with tabs I hadn't updated in months. Maybe I didn't want to see it in writing, but I needed to tonight. I brought the folder to the kitchen table, sat with a pen in hand, like I was preparing for a final exam. Not for them, for me. The first printout was from the bank. $900 auto-transferred on the first of every month for the past 4 years. Marked family support. My name on the sending line. Thomas's on the receiving. Then the property tax bill. Still under my name. Paid in full last May, just under $6,000. The electric bill, gas, water, internet. All routed through my account, the payments made automatically. I told them it was easier that way, that I had it covered. And I did back then. I was still working part-time at the clinic, still getting small benefits from Harold's pension. Now retired, it cut deeper. And no one had asked if I still wanted to help. They just assumed. I flipped to a handwritten page in the back of the folder. It was a tally I'd once started and never finished. Medical expenses I'd paid, grocery runs, surprise birthdays, a new washer when theirs broke. I'd done it with love. But love given in silence has a way of becoming currency no one remembers spending. Tonight, every line felt heavier. Every check written, every quiet nod had led me to that kitchen stool with no plate, no voice, and no place. I closed the folder gently. They hadn't stolen from me. I gave it. Willingly. But giving year after year without pause or thanks, it had taken something from me too. And tonight, I wanted to take something back. I was halfway through changing into my nightgown when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost ignored it, thinking it was one of those holiday ads that never seemed to stop. But something nudged me to look. Group chat Christmas Eve, logistics and food. I hadn't seen that name pop up in a long time. I tapped the notification and scrolled up. It was the old family thread we used years ago to plan potlucks and birthdays. I'd stopped posting in it when Marissa took over the hosting. No one ever removed me, and I never asked to leave. Marissa must have forgotten that part. Marissa. She actually came? Still acting like anyone wants that dry pie, lol. Marissa. At least she didn't expect a gift this time. I stared at the words. They were time-stamped less than an hour after I'd left their house. I waited for anyone to reply. Maybe Thomas would say, "Don't talk about my mom like that." Maybe one of Marissa's sisters would say, "Come on, that's mean." But no replies came. Just a little gray heart icon under Marissa's message. My son had liked it. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the fabric folder still lying open on the table beside me, numbers and receipts still spread like proof I never meant to need. The pie I had brought was still wrapped in foil. I'd brought it home like a habit I couldn't break. Maybe I'd hoped they'd call and say they were sorry. Invite me back tomorrow. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened the trash. The pie slid in without a sound. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just washed the thermos and set it upside down on the drying rack. The group chat stayed open on my phone. I watched the 3 dots appear for a moment, then disappear. No one had anything left to say, but I did. The sun hadn't fully risen when I sat down at the kitchen table again, this time with purpose. A different kind of quiet filled the room. Not sadness, not bitterness. Something sharper. Clearer. I poured myself a mug of coffee and opened my address book. Nora Halbrook, Real Estate and Family Law. We'd gone to the same church for years back when I still went. Her number was already in my phone. I pressed dial before I had time to second-guess it. She answered on the second ring. "Lorena," she said warmly. "I was just thinking of you." "I'm ready," I said, "to take the house back." There was a pause. "You mean, to move in again?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. "No. I want it listed, market rate, available by the 1st of next month." Her voice adjusted instantly. Professional now. "I'll draw up the paperwork. Do you want us to serve notice in person or by mail?" "Certified mail is fine," I said. "And I'd prefer no calls, no discussions." She understood. Nora always understood. After we hung up, I folded my hands around the warm mug and stared out the window at the quiet street. My apartment was small, yes, but every inch of it was mine. I paid for it. I cleaned it. I lived in it without apology. I didn't tell Thomas. Not because I wanted to hurt him, not because I needed to punish them. I simply didn't owe them the conversation. They had made it clear who I was, now a guest, an afterthought, a punchline in a text thread. And I had spent too many years asking for permission to take up space in places I had built. Now, I was just signing my name where it already belonged. I took a long sip of coffee and opened my laptop. It was time to let the house go on my own terms. The letter went out on a Thursday. Nora sent me a copy, formal, clean, not unkind. To current occupants, this letter serves as 30 days notice that the property will be listed for rental as of February 1st. The current owner intends to exercise her legal right to reclaim and lease the property. There was no mention of names, no drama, just business. By noon the next day, the calls started. First from Thomas, then from a number I didn't recognize, probably Marissa's sister. Then Thomas again. 8 calls in total. 2 voicemails. I didn't listen. Instead, I watered the peace lilies by the window. They'd been drooping lately, too much shade, not enough attention. I gave them what I could let the rest be. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. I didn't turn around. The lilies weren't dramatic. They just bent gently when they'd had enough. They didn't scream. They didn't beg. They simply stopped standing up. I understood that now. The emails came next. Subject lines like "please call" and "can we talk about this?" I archived them all. There was nothing left to explain. I had offered more than shelter over the years. I gave stability. I gave silence. I gave grace. But somewhere along the way, they began to believe that generosity was permanent, that because I had always said yes, I never had the right to say no. They were wrong. By the end of the weekend, my inbox had quieted. So had my phone. The apartment, meanwhile, felt lighter, cleaner, like something had been lifted from the corners of the room. I moved slowly through my routines. A small load of laundry, a slice of toast, a crossword half finished. No one interrupted. No one asked for anything. It was the first Sunday in years that belonged entirely to me, and just before bed I clicked approve on the rental listing. The house was officially on the market. It took less than 10 days. Nora called to say the listing had sparked immediate interest. A young couple teachers came to see the house that same weekend. They weren't flashy. They didn't ask for discounts or extra time. They stood in the living room with wide eyes and said, "It feels warm in here." I hadn't stepped inside since Christmas Eve, but when Nora sent me the photos they took, I stared at them for a long time. The furniture was still there, the layout unchanged, but something looked different. The house looked ready to breathe again. They signed the lease on a Wednesday afternoon. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note in neat, curved print. "Thank you, Mrs. Maddox. We promise to take care of this home. It already feels like love lives here." I read it 3 times. Not because I doubted the words, but because I couldn't remember the last time anyone had thanked me for a roof, for warmth, for space. I opened a new savings account that weekend, one I hadn't planned to ever use. I set up the direct deposit from the tenants and titled the account simply, "For me." It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was peace wrapped in numbers I didn't owe to anyone. That first payment hit my account on the 1st of the month. I made a note of it in a little blue notebook and then closed the cover without ceremony. I didn't tell Thomas. I didn't need to. He knew. And the silence between us was no longer heavy. It was clean. The old house sat just a few blocks away, but I didn't pass it anymore. I didn't need to check on it. It was cared for now. And I had my own walls, my own coffee, my own stillness. What they never gave me, strangers, had offered freely respect. And just like that, something inside me started to settle. I heard through Nora that the move-out went quickly. No protest, no fuss. Just a locksmith, a cleaning service, and a key exchange. 2 weeks later, A neighbor mentioned that Thomas and Marissa had moved into an older apartment complex across town. No laundry in unit, no fenced yard for the twins, and street parking only. The kind of place I used to live in before Harold saved up enough for our first down payment. It was quiet after that. No calls, no voicemails. Just one text. Thomas, we're struggling. Why would you do this to us? I read it in the middle of folding towels. I didn't answer. I placed the phone down beside the laundry basket and kept folding. It wasn't a question. Not really. If it had been, he would have asked sooner. For decades, I lived on careful budgets, second-hand furniture, and short grocery lists. I raised him in a one-bedroom apartment until we could afford better. I walked to work. I never once complained. I didn't expect applause, but I never imagined that my sacrifices would one day be mocked or worse, forgotten. Now they were living the same kind of life, compressed, humbling, inconvenient. The kind where every dollar had a purpose and every extra came with guilt. The irony didn't satisfy me. It just confirmed what I'd long suspected. They didn't understand the cost of comfort because someone else had always paid it. I made a pot of chili that night, enough for 2 days. Sat by the window with my knitting and listened to the radiator clank through the walls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was warm. Mine. The next morning, I transferred the rental income into my savings again. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel sorry. I simply chose myself first. And then, one quiet Sunday morning, just before I poured my second cup of coffee, someone knocked on my door. The knock was soft, like someone unsure whether they deserved to be heard. I opened the door slowly. Thomas stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes sunken, jaw tight. He looked smaller somehow, like the cold had gotten into his bones and stayed. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he exhaled. Mom. I stepped aside. I didn't invite him in, but I didn't close the door either. He stayed on the threshold. We were awful, he said. I know that now. His voice cracked, not from tears, but from exhaustion. Like life had finally spoken to him in a language I couldn't teach. The kind that comes only after the cushions are gone, the fridge is half empty, and your pride no longer pays the bills. I forgot what you gave, he said. What you did. What you carried. We both did. He looked down at the floor, then back at me. I'm sorry. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let the words sit between us heavy and late. There had been a time when that apology would have broken me wide open, when I would have wrapped my arms around him, whispered that it was okay that I understood. But that time had passed. I nodded. Thank you for saying it. He looked relieved, like maybe that was enough. But I didn't move from the door. Some apologies heal, I said, keeping my voice steady. Others just arrive too late to fix what they broke. He blinked, but didn't argue. I could see the shame in his eyes. Not dramatic, not performative. Just real. I didn't slam the door. I didn't ask him to leave. I just stepped back inside and closed it gently behind me. I returned to my chair by the window, coffee still warm. My peace untouched. The truth was I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need revenge or remorse. I had finally made space for something else. And the next day, I baked again. The kitchen smelled like brown sugar and toasted pecans by mid-morning. I didn't rush. I measured everything by hand, no shortcuts, no second guessing. The same recipe I'd made for years, but this time there was no need to impress anyone. No crowd to please. No one watching, waiting, judging. Just me. When the pie cooled, I set one plate on the table and poured myself a cup of coffee. No folded napkin, no centerpiece, just warmth. I sliced the pie evenly and placed the first piece on my plate. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't wait to be offered. I didn't think of who might want it more. I didn't save the best corner for someone else. I ate slowly, not because I was sad, and not because I was celebrating, but because every bite was mine. The crust crumbled just right. The filling was soft, not dry. I smiled. Maybe Marissa was right, it used to be dry, but not anymore. Next year I might make 2 pies. One for a neighbor. Maybe for that couple who moved into the house they sent another thank you card last week, along with pictures of the garden starting to bloom again. But this pie. This one was only for me. I washed the plate, refilled my coffee, and stood by the window as the light shifted across the floor. My small apartment didn't echo like the big house used to. It didn't carry the sound of footsteps upstairs or arguments in the hallway. But it held something else, peace. I'd spent years feeding people who never looked back. Years asking if there was enough for everyone while forgetting to ask if there was enough left for me. Now, I had just enough. Enough space. Enough quiet. Enough to hold myself with dignity and care. I pulled out my notebook, the one with no names in it, and wrote a single line under today's date. I ate first.